Hi, this is Tom. Today I'm coming to you from one of my favorite places in the world, which is my little home cinema here. And I just thought this would be an appropriate location for this video, for the topic of this video, because this time I would like to talk about models. Now you can probably imagine that I'm not talking about the runway supermodel kind of models. No, I have a different kind of model in my mind that I would like to speak about, and I would say these are models that represent ideas, represent things, and models that exist in the minds of human beings and also in other media. And I think there's a big relevance to the topic of these models. Social, technological relevance in many regards, which is why I'd like to talk about them today. And I will get to the point why I think these models are so important in the course of this video, I hope. But let me start by saying that to me I differentiate between three different categories of these models, and obviously these models that I'm talking about, the way they exist in the physical world, in the brain of humans especially, there's not really a difference between these three categories that I see. Physically it's all the same. There are synaptic connections, there's a neural network in the human brain, and you can't look at this connectome, if you will, and see three different categories. Obviously you can't. But I think for this observation that I'm making, to me it makes sense to look at three different categories. So I will get into what I think these three categories are now. The first category that I see, the first type of model, is the scientific model, I would call it. I think that's the appropriate name. And these would be models that represent in some way something that exists in the real world, in our observable real universe, and models that can, to a certain degree, represent the function of something in the physical world. So, for example, most people, I guess, would have a model of a glass of water in their mind, in their brain, which would allow them to, when they see something like this, when they see a glass of water, you have immediately a certain set of simulations, I would say, in your mind that tell you what kind of function this glass has, how it will behave when you pick it up, that it's probably has a hard surface, that you, when it's full, shouldn't turn it around, turn it on its head, because then the water is going to run out. All of these things, that you can take a sip from it like this, that the water is probably going to be more or less tasteless, and that you can put it back on the table, all of these things. So this is the kind of virtual simulation model that I'm talking about, that most human beings have about almost everything that they experience in their everyday lives. So you have a model of a door, how a door works, how a window works. Many people have certain degree of model of how a car works in their mind. But of course there are differences. So many people just know, for example, staying with the car, that you can use your key to open the door, you can sit in there, you can put on your safety belt and start the engine, and yeah, you have the general idea of how to operate a car as a simulation in your brain. Only certain people who have an education in engineering or something like that have a more detailed model of how a car functions and behaves. So you can see there are levels of detail of these models that humans can have in their minds. And I think this process simply starts very early in a human's life. As soon as sensory input begins to come in through our sensory organs and goes through our nervous systems into our brains and starts to shape this neural network, this connectome in our brain, and through repetition of things that we see and hear and touch and smell and taste, these models begin to shape in our brains. And for a human being, I would say that perhaps doesn't take a scientific education in their lives, these models have a more of an everyday level, I would simply call it. So you could also say they're on a medium macroscopic level. So most people just don't have models, or many people from their everyday observations just don't have models about how microscopic things behave, or things even on a quantum level behave. And most people from their everyday observations with their own biological sensory organs also obviously cannot have models about how cosmological or just astronomical phenomena work, and these kinds of things behave, because we just know about the things that are basically more or less our size and that we can work with our hands and see with our eyes and hear with our ears. And obviously you can, as a human being, you can choose to refine the models in your brain by, as I said, by getting an education in one or many scientific fields, looking into microscopic or quantum level phenomena and physical things, and that way you can also have models for the behavior of things on microscopic level and also on the big cosmological level, if you want. So yeah, unfortunately I would say many people just after of course their early years, where they learn to just pick something up and learn how it behaves when you pick it up, and learn how to speak and interact with other people, and learn what you learn at school, and learn about how you have to get a job and have to earn money so you can go to the shop and buy some food and pay your rent and all of these things. After they have formed these models of how our current world works, many people stop to a large degree to be interested in forming new models about the world in their brain. So many people just are satisfied with knowing, okay, these are the things that I have to do, and they just accept that that's the way it is. Fortunately, other people aren't satisfied with that and want to look in more detail into how social systems work, and into how physical systems work, and all of these things. So yeah, if you will, that's the first thing I would recommend, is to just not be satisfied with knowing this very basic understanding getting these just very most basic models in your brain of how your everyday life works, of getting up and going to work, and like I said, earning your money and buying your stuff. Just try to understand the world as well as you can on every possible level that you're interested in, or not yet interested in. Maybe just try to get interested in it if you're not yet. In any case, that's the first category of model that I see that allows people to understand the world in a general sense, that are models that, like I said, again, represent actual things or actual phenomena, like a social system, like an economic system, like a tree or a remote control or whatever that exists in our observable world. And as I've already mentioned, these models obviously cannot just be shaped in our minds, in our brains, but what many people obviously do is they put them down on paper, write books about these models, these scientific theories, make documentary movies about them, talk about them to other people. And so these models can be transferred, passed on to other people. Other people can learn about the models that have already been formed before by other people. And then once you have learned about such a model, you can, of course, by doing research, by looking into things, refine the existing models, which is the nice thing about it, I think, that there's always a continuation of refinement of the models of our understanding of the world, of science in general, I would call it. And usually that moves forward and becomes better and better. So in most cases, I would say there aren't steps backwards. So I wouldn't know of any case where an existing model has become less refined in time. In all of the cases I know, people learned more and more and refined the existing models, and there's simply a closer and closer approximation to reality. And I'm simply not one of the believers in this idea of everyone has their own reality or something. To me, that's a nonsense idea. There's one physical world that we all live in, and obviously everybody has a different understanding of this physical world in their heads. But that doesn't mean that there are 7 billion realities. It just means that there are 7 billion understandings of reality, and each one of them is more or less close to the actual reality, is a more or less close approximation of our physical world. And you can just try, as well as it is possible to you, to come as close to this approximation in your life. To me, that's, I would say, one of the goals. I want to understand the world as well as I can. Of course, I have to weigh this off with other things that are important to me in my life. But as a general rule, I just try to, like I said, to understand reality as well as I can, because I think it helps me to do other things that I will talk about in the coming minutes in this video. So yeah, I think that's most of what I wanted to say about this first category of models for now. Now, I think the second category is why I actually, as I said in the beginning, chose this location for my video this time. As you can see and not see outside the edges of the frame you see, there's a lot of Blu-rays of, I guess, a few hundred movies in here, and lots of books, fictional and non-fictional books, comic books and action figures, and as you can see behind me here, all kinds of movie memorabilia and collectibles and just stuff that represents stories in some way, and fictional things that people have thought up. And that's where I see the second category of models that exist. As you can already imagine, I mean everything that in some way represents an idea that is not a model of something in our observable universe. So whatever fictional story you know about, from Star Trek to The Matrix to Star Wars to Lord of the Rings to whatever you can think of, is in some way a model of a world, of a story that doesn't exist, at least not to our knowledge, and a story that has never happened. But still it's a model that people can have in their mind of fictional events, of fictional people, fictional places, fictional worlds, fictional things that that are in some way, at least in the mind, like I mentioned in the beginning, no different to the scientific models. So when I think in my mind of, let's say, as you can see here, this awesome thing from Back to the Future Part 2, the hoverboard. I have in my mind a model, a virtual model of a hoverboard that is, in my mind, not different than a model of a remote control, if you will. I know the function of a hoverboard, even if it has never really existed, as well as I know the function of a remote control. So you can see now, I guess, why I would differentiate between these two things, because obviously these models aren't created by observing something in the world and creating a model of something observable, but by coming up with, like I already said, with fictional ideas, with things that don't exist yet. And why I think this is a very important thing to do is a little bit in contrast to what some other people think. I think it's something that just enables people to not just understand the world that exists, but to do more than that. So, how do I say this? I think I'll rather talk about this when I come to the third category of models that I mean. But for now, I'd just like to say, the way I see it, every movie you watch and every book you read and comic book you read and all of these things, they just help you and enable you to learn and train your imagination. And I think, of course, there are at least two important factors about this. First, I guess it's your own responsibility to just choose which stories you want to ingest and which are simply irrelevant for you. So, to me, the more imaginative something is, the more I think it helps me in this regard, and the more it interests me. And when something is just, I don't know, the typical romantic comedy or gangster story or drug story or whatever, then that is of course also a fictional story, but it doesn't give me anything imaginative in that sense, because even though it's fictional, it represents something that could at least exist in our observable universe. Whereas when I look at Star Wars or The Lord of the Rings or things like that, then that's different, obviously, in that regard, as it represents things that, as far as we know, cannot exist in our, or do not exist in our observable universe. So that's why I would say the science fiction and the fantasy stories have always, at least to me personally, been far more interesting than like I said, watching some romance movie or some comedy, something that's just a story about a crime and cops or FBI agents trying to solve this. These latter things have never interested me very much, because they don't add much of interest, nothing creative, nothing imaginative to my worldview, or not even worldview, I would say, to the models in my mind. Simply, there aren't any new models given to me when I watch some crime story. I already know there's crime, I already know there are cops and trying to solve those crimes. But when I watch some science fiction or some fantasy, that simply gives me things that in many cases I haven't thought about before, or at least in some cases. And I think this just can enable me and anyone who does that to become better at being creative and being inventive and imaginative themselves, because I think that's something that needs to be trained. And I observe that with people in my life, that of course there are exceptions, but as a general rule, when someone is, let's say, just interested in watching sports mostly, and yeah, not very interested in watching the crazy science fiction fantasy stories, then those people are usually themselves not very imaginative. Now, I don't know the causality here. Of course, maybe they don't like to watch science fiction or fantasy things because they are not imaginative, but I think to me the causality is the other way around. So I think those people don't have a trained imagination because they never watched a lot of these fantastic fictional things, if you will. So I think it's very important and a very good thing for people to train their own imagination, their own ability to invent fictional things in the way that they just read these things and watch these things and just, I don't know, build models of fictional starships, or have action figures, play with them, whatever. Simply engage your mind with fictional things, and the more fantastic and unrealistic they are, I think the better this works, the better you train your own imagination. So that was the one factor I wanted to talk about in choosing which fictional stories to ingest and to engage your mind with. And the other factor is that, of course, there can be a level of scientific models embedded, if you will, in fictional models. So what do I mean with that? Something that I mentioned already, The Matrix, for example, to me transports a lot of scientific models within the fictional story, if you will. It allows me, at least when I watch the Matrix movies, it gives me, on a certain level, a lot of understanding of the real world, of social phenomena, mostly also scientific phenomena. So I think every kind of fictional story, from probably at the lowest level, things like murder, crime story, or Teletubbies or something like this, to on probably the highest level, things like The Matrix, or movies like and books like Cloud Atlas and Avatar. There's a range of how much potential for understanding the real world in some degree is embedded or hidden or woven into a fictional story. So that is the second factor by which I think you can choose your fiction that you ingest. But I don't even think that factor is that important in what I'm talking about right now. So of course it's great when you can watch something that is socially relevant or scientifically relevant, and is a great and exciting fictional story at the same time. That's awesome. But I think even the dumbest, if you will, story, if it's imaginative and fantastic in some way, can help you form a better imagination yourself. So I think at the end of the movie I'm going to talk about a few more specific examples of fictional stories that I like. But now I want to get to the real meaning of this video, which is the third category of models that I see. And these are in some way a combination of the other two that I've talked about, and I would call them maybe visions or inventive models. I don't know. I don't know the perfect word for it that I would use, but what I mean are things that are in some way something that is from the second category, something that is imagined, cannot be observed right now in our world, but something that could exist in our world. So I guess you can already imagine what I'm talking about. What I mean are models that we can create and that can then be made a reality. So every invention, every technological invention, for example, that has ever been made existed before it was made as such a model in the brain, in the mind of someone. And that's where I think we see, or at least I see, why the type 2, the second category, is so important, because I think it's very difficult for someone who has only a type 1 model understanding of the world, even if they have a really very good approximation, very good scientific approximation of many things in our physical world, in their mind, in their understanding. If they have absolutely no imagination, then it will be very difficult for them to come up with anything new, to invent something or to change something, because, well, I don't know if this needs further explanation, but I just think you need this craziness in some way, this ability to think outside of what you know, outside the box, as you call it, and to simply be able to imagine something that doesn't yet exist, but then apply what you know about the real world, apply your scientific knowledge to your imagination, and out of the two, when they come together, you can create something that can actually exist that hasn't existed before. And that can not only be technological things, these can also be social things, obviously. So for example, I often observe the problem of a lack of imagination with people who know a lot about history and about social and economic systems that existed in the past, and know a lot more probably about these things even than I do. But they simply lack the ability to imagine something new, something that hasn't existed before. And I think that's, I would say, to a large degree because their entire complex model of the world in their brain is based on what they've seen in the past and what they see today, and they don't have the ability to create new models and combine them with what they know about the real world and create something that hasn't existed before. So yeah, as I said, that's why I think it's extremely important to train your imagination and to be able to just say, this may sound crazy and this has never existed before, but look at it, I'm creating this new model, this model of, say, a hoverboard. And when I apply my knowledge about gravity and let's say about some technology that doesn't exist yet today, but even, for example, when I was a kid and saw that movie and saw the hoverboard, I actually had a skateboard back then. I screwed off the wheel mounts and the wheels, so it was just this board without anything keeping it rolling or floating. And I remember I actually drew and even bought some copper tubes, and was actually trying to think about how I could make this former skateboard float with an air tank or something that blows out air through these copper tubes at the bottom. And of course I realized then that that would not work in that way. But I mean, I can absolutely imagine that at some point in the future there will be an actual hoverboard, and it will only exist because, or will probably exist because someone saw the movie, and when the technology from the model type 1, from the scientific type of model that we have, when that has reached a point that it can be combined successfully with the imagination model of a fictional hoverboard, then this thing can actually be built. If only the scientific knowledge exists and no one has even the fictional idea of a hoverboard ever in their mind, then no hoverboard will be built because no one even thinks about it. So that's just an more or less irrelevant example, I would say, but I guess you know what I mean. Anything from, let's say, Star Trek, a huge inspiration, I think, for a lot of technology that we have today, much of which was just fiction 40 years ago, or nearly 50 years ago now, like the communicator or things like that, or even the shuttles that they used. And it's absolute reality today in our cell phones and the actual space shuttles that were built. And a lot of that, I'm sure, came from the imagination of people that had seen Star Trek. Of course, it also comes from actual demands of people. I mean, a shuttle wasn't just built because a space shuttle wasn't just built because someone had seen Star Trek, but because people wanted to go into space in an effective manner. Excuse me. but a thing like a cell phone, if there hadn't been the idea of a wireless communication device, then it wouldn't have been built if no one had ever thought of that. So, and staying with Star Trek, one example that has not been built yet, but that is definitely being worked on today, and will probably be worked on until it is actually built one day, would be the food replicator. I mean, just a few days ago, the first artificially created beef burger was eaten by someone here on the planet, and pretty much everyone has this idea of the replicator, of the food 3D printer in their minds, if you will, because that would obviously solve a lot of problems in the world. And it clearly comes from the ideas that Star Trek introduced of a replicator. So yeah, that's what I mean by this. And again, I can just emphasize again the importance of recognizing these models, because I think many people think, for example, that all this fictional stuff is completely irrelevant, and you just need a good scientific education, and then you can change something in the world. But I think that's nonsense. There's even a quote from Albert Einstein, which I can't say exactly now, but it was something like, knowledge takes you very far, but imagination takes you everywhere, or something like that. And I mean, I wouldn't put imagination over knowledge in that way. I think they both have to come together. If you just have all the imagination but absolutely no category 1 scientific modeling ability in your mind, then you also can't really do a lot. You can probably write great fiction, great books, or make great fictional movies. But yeah, and sure, if you can do that, then you can again help other people to train their own imagination, so there's something to be said for it. But you can't change anything in the real world. You can't create anything new yourself, at least if you lack the scientific knowledge, the scientific modeling ability. So I would say both are equally important and have to come together to create this type 3 model, this vision of something in the future, something that does not yet exist, something that you or someone else could build, be it a new social or economic system or a new technological invention, whatever. So I would say, yeah, type 1 and type 2 are equally important. Just learn as much as you can about the scientific understanding of the world, and at the same time get imaginative stuff into your brain. Just watch everything and read everything you can that is fantastic and that is science fiction and has the strangest, weirdest fantasy elements, because I think it helps you. I mean, if someone's totally, absolutely not interested in that kind of stuff, then, well, it will probably be difficult to read or watch things like that, but at least don't fail to recognize the importance of that, because I think many of the greatest inventors and many of the people who changed the most in the world in the past were definitely crazy imaginative thinkers and had certainly not kept anything fictional out of their brain because they thought it was irrelevant in some way. Yeah. Now, one thing I wanted to talk about when I'm on the topic of fictional stories, because here you can see this guy behind me, this T-800 Terminator, because I think also the relevance and the meaning of fictional stories is often misunderstood, and it's also very important, I think, to really try to understand fictional stories in the right way. Because, for example, with the whole Terminator story, I often hear the interpretation that basically these Terminator movies are bad for people, are a bad influence because they tell us that artificial intelligences might go evil or crazy and try to kill all humans. And I think that's a complete bullshit interpretation. And yeah, anyone who sees these, especially the first two Terminator movies that were made by James Cameron, anyone who sees them in that way really didn't pay attention and misunderstood them, because first of all, the artificial intelligence in these stories, Skynet, it wasn't simply an artificial intelligence that went evil, got evil and tried to kill everyone. It was built as a weapons system. It was built as a artificially intelligent global weapons system. So when you watch the first and the second movie, you can clearly hear that what Skynet did was it fired nuclear missiles at Russia, if I remember correctly, and I think I do, so that the Russians, when they fired back, destroyed America, and this huge nuclear world war started. And I think that's a very important thing that is definitely not a coincidence, I think, because James Cameron could have simply written the story as, well, Skynet detonated all the nuclear weapons in their launch tubes, or simply fired them directly at the US, but that's not what happened. And I think that's the important thing about the story, because what the story really says is that the weapon systems, the weapons we create, will be used against us and will backfire at us. That's why the story was written in the way that Skynet fires the missiles at Russia and Russia fires back. So yeah, and again, just generally speaking, Skynet is a weapons system. It's designed as a weapon, and not just artificial intelligence that becomes evil. So yeah, try to not understand stories that you read or watch in the completely wrong way, because this is not a story that tries to tell people artificial intelligences are a bad idea. The message of the story, if you will, is don't create weapon systems, don't create more and more intelligent weapon systems, because it will backfire. It has the potential to destroy anyone who builds such a weapon system, because, well, your enemy will also build an intelligent weapon system, and when this intelligent weapon system becomes global even, then yeah, that's basically the dumbest, worst idea that you can have, and the dumbest thing you can do, because then when the whole thing goes down, it's gonna be very bad. And interestingly enough, another movie by the same guy, James Cameron, Avatar, is hugely misunderstood, I think, very often, where some people keep claiming the movie promotes a violent solution in some way, because in the end it just comes down to a fight, which I think couldn't be further from the truth, actually, because anyone who has actually watched this movie with some degree of attention will remember that the Na'vi and the scientists in the movie try in every way they can to find a peaceful solution with this greedy corporation that tries to just take this unobtainium from that planet or that moon, and the peaceful solutions simply don't work, and in the end what it comes down to is self-defense. So I think it's taking the pacifism, if you will, way too far when people say this promotes a violent solution because the Na'vi defended against these attackers. Obviously, anyone would defend against attackers like that, and people who interpret the movie in that way miss all the relevant points of the movie, that actually are the humans in the story are still in a monetary system in a technologically advanced future, and have basically polluted and fucked up our planet, and are now trying to steal resources from other intelligent races or species somewhere else in the universe, which doesn't work out so well for them. So yeah, one of the most important messages of the movie is, let's not do that. Let's not get to the point where we screw up our own environment and exhaust our own resources to the point that we have to go somewhere else and steal resources from someone else. And obviously, I think the even more important message that I hope is gonna be addressed even more in the sequels that are being produced is simply the way the Na'vi on Pandora live together and live in a balance with their own environment that is completely different from what we have today and what the humans in the story have, which is simply in a symbiosis and in complete respect to nature and all of these things, and obviously not in a barter or trade market economy of any kind. I don't think it's a coincidence or an oversight that we never see the Na'vi using any kind of money or currency or even trade or barter in the movie. If you pay attention, that is definitely a primitive resource-based economy, which is not a problem. I mean, I don't mean primitive in the negative way here, I just mean a not technologically advanced resource-based economy, but they clearly live together in a sharing and gift economy where everyone has their role, their job, if you will, and they share all the fruits of their labor. So I would actually, really recommend people to try to understand movies in the right way, and also books that they read, obviously, and every kind of fictional material that they ingest. And yeah, that's that's, I guess, what I wanted to say. So to sum it up once more, try to really get this concept of these 3 categories of models that you can have in your brain, and obviously in other kinds of media like book and movies and things like that. At least if you like that meta model of these models, if you will. And if you like it, then try to be conscious of it and try to just apply it to your own life. Try to learn as much as you can about the category 1 scientific model in as many different and varying areas of the whole scientific fields that exist, and also train your brain with imaginative stuff. Feed it with fantastic stories, and simply don't be afraid to pick up a comic book or Deadpool or whatever is imaginative. I mean, these things don't all have to be super high brainy, or don't even have to transport the right values if you want. I mean, okay, maybe don't pick Atlas Shrugged of all things when you want to read a fictional book, because that's probably something that is the worst kind of thing you can pick when you look at the values it transports. But if you want something that contains the word Atlas, then pick Cloud Atlas, basically the opposite on the spectrum. Read the book, and it's I think the most relevant story, in relevant fictional story that exists today. Or just watch the awesome movie by the Wachowskis and Tom Tykwer, Cloud Atlas. But everything in between, or most of the things in between the fiction with the best values and with the worst values, when it's, I don't know, many people, for example, complain about how Iron Man or Captain America comic books or movies like that are somehow patriotic and therefore immediately a bad thing or something. But I mean, when you already recognize that it's patriotic, then you can recognize that, and you can read or watch these things and not have your brain completely fucked up because Captain America is patriotic, which, by the way, he isn't at all. Again, great misunderstanding. But sure, when you promote things, or when you suggest something to someone else, then maybe don't recommend exactly the stupidest or the most patriotic or military supporting or capitalism supporting stories that exist. But that again is up to your own judgment and your own responsibility to simply pick and choose, and also recognize when there are values and messages in stories that aren't great in some way, then simply ignore them. But there's still, like I said, those 2 factors of fictional stories. And one of them is when it transports some kind of social or technological understanding, then that is just secondary, and there's still a factor of imaginativeness. And as long as it's imaginative, as long as it's fantastic, supernatural even, or science fiction in some way, it helps. It does something positive, because it trains your brain to become more imaginative. So yeah, do these 2 things is my recommendation. balance them in the way that suits you best. Learn about scientific things, learn about the real world, and also allow yourself to simply sit down and watch a cartoon or a fantasy movie at a point when you want to relax, because it can only help you. Actually, it can help you make your make your mind and your brain better at imagining new things. And then when it comes to the really relevant third point, apply your abilities in both fields, put them together, imagine new things, and make them real, or at least imagine new things that are based on scientific understanding, and put them down in a design or in a just written idea, talk about it to other people, invent something new, try to come up with something new that is based on what is actually real and actually feasible, but is something at this point visionary and fantastic, and bring the two together, and then you can actually change the world. Basically, you can come up with something new, make an innovation. And yeah, that's, I think, at least to me, that's what I try to do. I've just begun this process. I think I've at least tried for most of my life to understand things. I've also been a fan of all this fictional stuff for a long time, but this bringing it together is really the step that I'm gonna try to do in the future, trying to simply be innovative and imaginative in ways that can actually be made a reality. And that's where I see the potential to make the world a better place, make an actual change where people, where people are visionaries. That sounds like such a big word, but I think everyone can be a visionary and can actually change the world, but that's just not something that happens without working for it, without training your mind and your brain in giving it the necessary tools to create, like I said, virtual models in your mind. So yeah, I hope this idea of these models and their potential for making a change, for changing the world, making it better, is somehow interesting to you. Maybe it wasn't anything new to you, then that's great. If I could give you a new inception of a new idea with this video, then I'm glad that I could. And with that, I would say live long and prosper, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.